So I'm Emma, and we're here today with Sarah Weeks, who's going to present this webinar, and we're going to talk about how to do research with web archives. So researching with web archives. Um, Very quickly, we will do a Q&A at the end. So if you can hold your questions. And then we are recording this webinar, and I will email it out to everybody who registered. So if you're thinking about coming to one of our webinars, but you don't know if you can make the time, go ahead and register, because we send everybody an email to the recording. We put it on our YouTube channel as well. And then please stay muted with your microphone off. This is just so we can hear Sarah. So just kind of quickly, like, who are we? Why are we putting this on? Backlog is my company, and we're an archival consulting firm, and we work with both individuals and institutions. As far as institutions go, we work with archives. We can do archival needs assessments, which are basically a roadmap to how to, next steps for your archives. We can write policies, and then we do digitization plans and can set you up with a digital archive system. For individuals, we do a lot of genealogy research, and that can be anything from I'm stuck in this my great great grandmother, we can't find her parents, like how do we get past that brick wall? We do a lot of that. We do a lot of German genealogy, and we also verify a lot of ancestry findings. So if you're kind of clicking around in ancestry and you've hit that hint button too many times and the green leaf pops up, sometimes you need to kind of work through that. And then we also can help with lineage society applications. So if you're trying to get into the DAR, SAR, we can do that research. And then also for individuals, we can do family tree books, oral history interviews, or digital family archives. Like right now, we're working on a history of a fraternity here in Missouri. So it's just kind of anything you need recorded for future generations. Okay, I'm Emma. Backlog is my company. I founded Backlog in 2021 after being laid off during the pandemic. Before that, I was a university archivist for a number of years. And before that, I worked in genealogy reference. So that's where the genealogy stuff comes in. We really work with a lot of institutions on helping them bring their collections online, how to connect to your community. And this is Sarah Weeks, and Sarah is going to give today's presentation. I'll let her take it from here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Weeks. I work at Washington University when I'm not doing work for Backlog, and I also volunteer at the National Building Arts Center. If you are at all interested in the intersection of archives and the built environment, I highly recommend checking that place out. Next slide. So today we're going to be talking about web archives, using the web archives, doing research with web archives. This is the third of 3 webinars. So the first one was kind of about what are web archives? What is this? What even are they? And the second one was more just kind of expanding on that, how to create one if you need to use one. If you have websites that you need to archive, how to accomplish that. And this is about using web archives, either if you have your own, which is a little unlikely, or other people's. If you, there are certain types of research that could really benefit from using web archives as a source. And if you once, how do you know if that's a good source for you for the kind of research you want to do? And then once you find one, what do you do with it? So that's what we're covering today. This quote I really like. I've been a web archivist for a few years now at WashU in St. Louis. I think a lot about web archives as a format. So as kind of comparing or contrasting with other archival formats, like paper, film, media, born digital, things that never existed on paper but were always on a computer, and then web pages. So just kind of like, why are we doing this? What's special or different about web archives? So it's one thing to save something, to preserve something in an archive, whatever the item is, it has a certain kind of research value or cultural value, but it's another thing to save the same or what is ostensibly the same resource multiple times over time and get to watch it change, things disappear, things come online, And then that time element can really expand the value of those documents and really open up different kinds of research or knowledge that you can glean from it. So that's kind of a little bit about like why web archives are special. Next slide, please. So here's what we'll cover today. It's, sometimes I feel like I'm still wrapping my mind around what are web archives. Is that like, you take the website and you print it out and you put it in a box, like, what is it? We're going to go over that just a little bit, although that's covered mostly in the other two webinars. What can they be used for? They're not useful for all situations, but the situations that they are useful for, they're very useful. Third, how do you find a web archive that suits your needs? They're not just, it's not just going to be like first result on Google is going to be your thing that you need. And then lastly, once you find one, how do you perform the research? How do you take your research question and make the resource give you the knowledge that you need? Next slide, please. So we'll just do a little bit of a short recap. So why do we need web archives? Why can't we just, print it out and call it good, call it archived? It has a lot to do with how hyperlinks work. I mean, we've all been on the web, we all know how hyperlinks work, but if you think about how nonlinear they are, think about any website, whether it's like CNN.com or maybe the website for an organization that you work for or volunteer for. You Even if you were to decide to click on every link in that website, you probably wouldn't do it in the same order twice. And that's something that needs to be preserved. If we're going to preserve our website, we have to preserve that usability. It's also possible, increasingly so, as time goes on, we can preserve videos or other dynamic features like maps that move around and things like that. Next slide. So more about, I really like to talk about, like, you can't just take a web archive and put it in Google. You can't just take it and put it in a scholarly database, or it's different from like newspapers.com. It's different from scholarly resources. But it does fit into archival practice. And again, it is that hyperlink function that makes this possible. My French is going to be really bad, but not as bad as, I mean, I'm in St. Louis where like when we say carondelet, we say carondelet. So I'll try and do a little bit better than that. But archival practice, I mean, it's just like, as with librarianship or law or economics, any discipline you can think of, there are standards. Archives have been around since as long as we have had forms of communication. But the tout ensemble came around in about the 1840s. Before that, they would just take a stack of documents and rearrange them. Well, let's just serve the user. Let's just put them in whatever order we think is just makes sense to us as archivists. But after the 1840s, came the idea of the tout ensemble, where if you take, say, a donor, take the papers of a donor, and it's their stuff, they're transferring their file cabinet to you. It made sense to them, and so it's important in archival practice to keep things in that order. And so we practice respect des fonds. A fond is a group of documents that share the same origin, and this is contrasting from what we call an artificial collection. So, like, I'm an Abraham Lincoln scholar, and I'm just going to collect everything from here and there about Abraham Lincoln, put it in whatever order I want. They might be historic documents with historic value, but we're calling it artificial because it does not align with respect des fonds. So the hyperlinks, websites having hyperlinks, websites appearing differently every time a web crawler captures them, we really do need to align with this in order to honor the document, honor the intention of the people who created the website. Next slide, please. So yeah, what we have here, just sort of to sum that up, we want to preserve it in its original entirety, or else it might lose its significance. We're very serious about this in archives, whether it's digital archives or traditional archives. If you work in a traditional archive, I'm sure that you've been through a lot of meetings where they talk about the significance of the document and just treat, we're historical stewards. We want to treat these documents with the honor and respect they deserve and try and save them for posterity. So that's how this works when it comes to web archives. Next slide, please. So the recap continues. Why does a web archive need to be in a special electronic place? So take the JPEG, an image file on the left versus the archived web page. It has a file format. It's a standard. It's called the WARC. And you can see on the right that a WARC is not just one thing, the way that an image is. It's a container file, like a zip file, and it contains all kinds of stuff. And the relationship between those things need to be retained in order for it to be a working web page in the archive. Next slide, please. And so when it comes to replay, if you want to look at an image file, you probably don't even think about it because there's so many ways to do it, and they all just they just do it. Whether it's on your phone, on a web browser, even if it's in Word or some other program, you put in any type of document, it can be pretty much any format, and it usually just works. Whereas on the right, we have something quite different. If we want to experience the archived website, we need to have it in a certain kind of software in order to replay it. So again, there's that element of time that's very important. We've got all these arrows going back and forth and red and blue like sections showing that it really is a process, even just to look at the thing. So that's something else that makes the web archive distinct from other types of archival formats. Next slide, please. So here, there is a whole world of web archives out there. And so these are just some of the categories. These are sort of like top level categories about what types of web archives there are. And I'm just going to let you read what some of these are. Spontaneous event collections, I will call out in particular, because we're going to talk about that maybe a couple times today. They can come from any number of places. They could come from a for-profit company. There's a lot of universities or large institutions, like a large art gallery or art museum might have a web archive. And we got into the particularities of some of these others in a couple of the previous webinars. So I'm not going to get into showing you what these are, but if you want to see that, check out the previous webinars. Next slide, please. And this also, it just touches on some of the things we talked about in the previous webinars that we won't be getting to today. So just kind of throwing that out there, just kind of defining what we won't be covering. They're very good for accountability, combating link rot. I gave a similar talk a few weeks ago at the St. Louis Regional Library Network Tech Expo, and somebody came up to me afterwards and she's like, I had to redesign a website and I lost half my stuff, and I went to the web archive and it helped me recreate my website. So certain functions like that can be done. But onward, next slide. We will start to talk about research. So it's still very niche. You're not going to be using a web archive to replace a lot of the typical places where you do your research today. But these topics are going to be really great places. Spontaneous events, when we talk about that, it's a lot of large scale emergent events such as wars or pandemics. There's a web archive called Sucho, Saving Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Organizations. Ukraine is experiencing war and the servers that their websites are on are not safe. You know, some of them are not going to make it. So web archiving is a fantastic way to try and preserve anything that's happening that's spontaneous, whether it's, you know, just really kind of a lot of the negative occurrences in our world, like a mass shooting. People are getting on Twitter, they're talking about it. And so those things are coming out, you know, in news stories that might change over time. Um, you know, as you've all seen, like when something, when an emergency or disaster happens, you go on like CNN.com or something, and the article will change over time. There are people who want to study that phenomenon. So, and then these are some of the other large research collections. Many of the big universities have very robust web archives. We're going to look at non-US countries as well. And much of this has to do with cultural heritage. Much of it is under the umbrella of cultural heritage. Next slide, please. Okay, so if we talking about research, how you can use them for research, the number one thing I want to talk about, because we're going to look at it just in a quite shallow way, is digital humanities. If you are a practitioner of digital humanities, we should talk or ask a question at the end, or you know, contact us, because I would love to chat about uses of web archives in digital humanities. But so these terms, data mining, textual analysis, if you're not familiar with them, then maybe just think of the next few slides as like something kind of just super cool, but not for the everyday researcher to really get into. But this is one application of web archives that's just beginning to occur, and that there's a lot of excitement in digital humanities about that usage. Let's go to the next slide. So I'll give you a few examples of kind of what that looks like, because it's very hard to describe. So this one, it's a little bit like a word cloud. These are all college sports conferences, and each one is a different color. You can see Big 12 and Pac-10. It says on the bottom, these are overlapping communities. Someone at Stanford is studying these. So the circular regions denote different communities, and there's lines between them showing relationships. So someone who's a digital humanities practitioner can study the relationship between these entities. Next slide, please. So this is from Arch, which is a service of Archivit, and they're big in the web archiving world. Washington University uses Archivit. It's a service, software as a service that can help you create web archives. So Arch does research in education. It helps users build and access and analyze digital collections, sort of computationally at scale, large scale. When you archive websites, you're archiving tons of them. So people who like to work at that scale, where there's just tons of items, where you can kind of zoom out and get that 30,000 foot view and see what relationships you can find. So this one in particular is looking at this collection called CARTA, which is Collaborative Art Archive. You can see there's some names of like galleries, juxtapose.com, Twitter and YouTube, anywhere that art is happening. And here they're examining who links to who, and then they can examine those relationships. Next slide, please. So this is a project called Hugging Face Hub, which I think is a reference to the movie Alien. There was an alien. So this is somebody's project. He refers to himself as a machine learning librarian. It's a task navigator, presents a way of filtering machine learning models hosted on this hub by the tasks that they intend to solve. So you can choose, like, I want one that does image classification. I want one that does image to text. So it's related to AI, but it can include or not include AI. It may or may not be humans making all of the decisions. So this has a bunch of different machine learning models covering a broad range of machine learning tasks. And if you're into digital humanities, you'll be very excited about this. Next slide, please. Here's another usage. So this graph is from the WARCnet project. It's a project that's studying all kinds of WARCs, which is archived web archives files. So they came into existence at the very beginning of COVID, and taking advantage of those, spontaneous emergent events, they started studying websites in different languages. All of the colors down the right side are different languages. There's a lot of red, that's English. And then the bottom axis is the dates. So you could, if you were gonna spend some time and really dig into this, you could study questions like what websites and what languages were most active at different times. So you can kind of track the COVID pandemic over time using stuff like this. So yeah, it's really just really heady stuff. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the last fancy picture diagram I'll show you. And this one is not actually web archives. This is email archives, but it shows a similar use of digital humanities. So these colors, this graph represents the email archive of Robert Creeley, who was a poet in the first half of the 20th century. Stanford has his email. He has donated his papers. You donate large boxes of all your manuscripts and your correspondence. So people are starting to donate their email. And that, again, much as web archives, it needs to be archived using different methods, using different tools. This particular screenshot is showing that during this time period in July 2024, there's 340 emails between Robert Creeley and Peggy Fox, who is the first person on the list, who's in pink. So if you're a certain kind of literature researcher, you get very excited about this stuff. You're like, oh, in the middle of 2003, he wasn't writing to anybody, like no emails with date of writer's block. So if you're really studying the history, the life of this person, this is just invaluable stuff you weren't able to study before. But email archiving is not just useful for research, but for preservation. If you work in an archive and you have somebody's email and then you don't know what to do with it, this is starting to be something that we're kind of able to tackle. You might reach out to Emma. Maybe there's something we could work out. It is kind of the next frontier in formats as far as digital archiving. So yeah, it's possible we could have a conversation about that. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so that is the end of the kind of next level research, and we're getting into kind of like everyday research, the kind that most of us probably do all the time. So the rest of the talk is going to be, I'm going to orient it around 4 starting points. So there's a Wikipedia list of web archiving initiatives. There's the Library of Congress. They have a certain set of web archive collections as well. There's, and then the bottom 2, Archival and the Wayback Machine. So the Wayback Machine is the Internet Archive. It's at archive.org. It's free. They just kind of crawl the web without a lot of curation. If you are interested in a certain website, it may or may not be there. But Archival is their paid service. So that's people, institutions who are rather well resourced, and they really want to have a web archive. They are very deliberate. They have specific things they want to web archive, and they'll curate them, add metadata. Washington University is one of those, and they have a bunch of web archive collections as well. So I'll get into like what's here, what's there, what's in Wikipedia, what's in Archival. So that's going to be the rest of the talk. Next slide, please. So first of all, Wikipedia, they have a list of all the web archive initiatives, and these are around the world, just sort of everyone they could find. There's a lot of web archives that are managed by individual countries. There's a list of different web archives in different countries. I counted about 50. Some of them have a mandate that they need to archive For instance, in Australia, they have one that archives every single website that ends in .au, which is the domain of Australia. So it happens very differently in other countries. If your research involves a non-US country, you might want to check that out. Let's see, next slide, please. So that's Wikipedia. Our second source of web archives is Library of Congress. If you go to loc.com/web archives, they do have some web archives there that are restricted. You have to actually go there in person to use. But here in the screenshot, I've selected available online, and there are 32,400 items. So an item in this case would be a URL or a website. Next slide, please. Here's one. This comes from the Library of Congress, but it just shows one of the facets or limiters, languages, and Library of Congress, being a Library of Congress, they have really taken care of a lot of that metadata to support their users and support search. I'm always reassured when I use a new tool if there's a good number of facets and they're understandable. Like at WashU, we have one that's called relation. Like, I don't know what relation is. But using a web archive, using a new tool, you want to see that the user interface is kind of tailored to be user friendly, and Library of Congress is one of those. Next slide, please. This is just a screenshot from Library of Congress, kind of detailing their user friendliness. I am just very happy that they've gotten into web archives and that they are sharing so many of them with the general public. For here they say, for instance, descriptive records for web archives are searchable using the library's site-wide search box. You can use the faceted search options to narrow or refine your search. So they're giving you like a little bit of a tutorial, helping you do research. Talks about like, here's what it looks like. Here's what you're seeing. Here's how the archived web page is displayed. They're saying, here's a description. Here's a thumbnail. So they don't just throw you in the deep end. They help you understand what you're seeing. Next slide, please. And here's a screenshot just showing a few of the ones available on the Library of Congress. We've got the Vatican website in Polish. There's one for the Texas Tribune, one for an individual newspaper over time, which is, it adds up quickly. It's a ton of stuff. There's one called Arab News, and there's one called Grantland, which is a website. It was a sports and pop culture blog. And you can see there the screenshot for it says, it was a good run. So just really alluding to the fact that these are websites that do not exist anymore. And what was it like when they did exist? And it's all here. Library of Congress has about 100 web archives, which is a lot smaller than our next source, which has a ton, but they are extremely well curated because, again, Library of Congress. Next slide, please. Okay, Archivit. This is just a really, I really hope that some of you get some use out of these collections. They are curated much more than the Wayback Machine, which again, they just kind of let their web crawlers loose on the web and grab whatever. But everything on Archivit is all of the collections were curated by somebody who really wants to have a web archive, kind of major institutions or well-resourced institutions. Although Archivit has sort of a philanthropic arm, they also provide their service to like smaller public libraries or marginalized voices. If they have archives out there, they will provide their services for them. So you can go to archive-it.org. And here it says explore collections. You can see there's one, Virginia's Political Landscape 2010, New York City, Places and Spaces. There's one about the earthquake in Haiti. So that's a few of the topics. Next slide, please. So this screenshot, much like the Library of Congress, they have tons of facets or delimiters down the left side. Everything is indexed. It's got metadata attached to it, so you can actually find stuff, which is amazing. This screenshot is showing you the collecting organizations. So the organizations that subscribe to Archivit, and there's 1,231, which is not bad. Next slide, please. So this view of Archivit shows the collections. So there's like 1,000 collecting organizations, and altogether they've created 10,410 different collections. Like WashU has 18. We've got the Worcester.edu websites. We've got one on WashU in the news, our COVID news archive. We have one for each of our archival collecting areas, like special collections, visual materials, special collections, manuscripts, special collections, local history. So this is kind of parallel to what these 10,000 results might be like at these other institutions. Next slide, please. And so this is, again, it's still in Archival. This is just some of the collecting organizations. So if you're interested in like, oh, the Federal Depository Library Program Web Archive, which was established by Congress in 1895 to provide free permanent public access to federal government information. If you're like, what do they have online? You can go to Archival and find out, which I'm not sure that you would find another way. So hence my calling out that archive-it/org URL. Next slide, please. So this is our fourth and last sort of aggregator to find different web archives, the Wayback Machine. So this is the Internet Archive. It's at archive.org. These are the people who do the Wayback Machine. If you go to archive.org, you'll see the Wayback Machine. That's where you do like a known item search. If you want to put in a URL that you know and see what it used to look like, you can do that. And we're going to do that in a few minutes. However, the Internet Archive has more than just the Wayback Machine. It's got things like county history books, biographical annuals, videos, school yearbooks. It's got ship passenger lists, which can be very important if you're into genealogy. I did a basic search. I found 511 ship passenger lists. So archive.org, it does support search, but not on that front page. You kind of have to know how to get to it. So you can search here. The radio button is what's selected is search metadata. So what humans deliberately chose to add to describe their stuff. Like I'm labeling this genealogy because I want people to be able to find it. Or if you want a real adventure, I could have chosen the second radio button, which is search text contents, which is absolutely anything uncontrolled. You'll get search results with a lot of noise, a lot of stuff you don't want or that isn't relevant. And then you can focus your search strategy on what happens after the initial search using the limiters or facets. Next slide, please. So I did a search for genealogy and I limited it only by media type. I chose websites as opposed to music or digitized books or other things that the Internet Archive has. And I got 135,000 results. So here I can hover over, I can see the tags. Here down the left side, you can also see a few of those limiters or facets. So much like Library of Congress or Archive, it's very robust in that way. So you can actually control your search, much like any research database or Ancestry or newspapers.com, anything like that. The Internet Archive has them too. You don't know about them if your only experience is just like, okay, I'm going to look up my life journal from 1999, type that in. But there's all of this stuff around in archive.org as well. So next slide, please. So here I have drilled down through all of those 135,000 things to one result. So this is an item. In this case, an item is a website, and I can see all of its metadata, like what are the topics, what are its description. Oh, it's an archive of jgsny.org. Do I know that website, or is this like a new thing that I could check out to maybe help me out in my research topic? Would it be of any interest to see what they used to have up in previous years? In this case, it would be 2013. Next slide, please. So here is the good old front page, archive.org, the Wayback Machine. If you've used a web archive at all, it was probably this one. Here I have typed in backlog-archivist.com. Go to the next slide and we'll see what it looks like. So this would be that known item search if you just know one particular website. what I get is that Backlog's website was saved 17 times between 2021 when it was instituted and 2023. I took the screenshot a while ago. There's probably captures since then. And you can see that on April 11th, for some reason, the web crawler, it does what it wants. It captured it 4 times. Next slide, please. And here's what it looks like, just like the real one, except it's got that across the top. It will show any archived website will have a banner so that you can distinguish it from the live web. And you can select different captures. So this was the services subpage. Next slide, please. Okay, so number one rule, if you're going to use a web archive, you always have to back up and try different dates. Each date is a capture, and here's why. Next slide. So this is not a backlog anymore. I'm going to show you a bad capture, so I didn't want to do that to Emma's company. This is from WashU. The URL is environment.wustel.edu. Say 53 times between these two dates. And next slide, please. So this was a bad capture. Even though WashU subscribes to Archive, we're controlling the web crawler as much as we possibly can, but it's only possible to control it to a certain extent. As a web archivist, I can say I only want to save up to a certain amount of data because I have a data budget because we pay for our data. Or I might say, please don't archive any YouTube videos because we already have those and those are very data heavy. But on this particular day, February 22nd, 2024, the web crawler did a very bad job. It did not grab the CSS, which is what makes the website look pretty and, normal, makes a website look normal. So all of these links are here. If I want to go to the About page or the People page, I can do that. It's just sometimes without the CSS, it can be almost impossible to find the web pages that you want, even though they may be there, they may not be there. Next slide, please. So here I have backed out. I have tried a different date. This one was captured March 2nd, 2024. I compare this to the live website and it looks beautiful. I know how to navigate this. I'm very comfortable. I'm like, yes, I know where to find my stuff. I know that Center for the Environment has a research page that has stuff that I really want. I know exactly where to go. And then if I'm going to look through the past, I'm going to look at 2020, 2016, maybe, and see what research they had at that time. Does the Center for the Environment keep all of their research up over time, or do they replace it with new research? I don't know. That's why I want to go to their web archive and find out. I don't know what their policy is, but as a researcher who, let's say I really care about the contents of this website over time, I have access to that. And that's what web archives can do for you that other types of web research cannot do. Next slide, please. I couldn't decide if metadata is plural or singular. I think it can be used both ways. So just a couple final tips for doing research in web archives besides backing out and trying advanced search versus simple search. If you used other databases, you may find that you'd like to do a lot of your configuration of your search before you hit search by using advanced search, filling out all the fields, maybe doing like between these two dates, that sort of thing. And depending on the database, they vary quite widely. I find you might want to do just a simple search. Just put in one keyword, get a bunch of what could be junk or garbage or noise, and then make use of the facets to limit from there. And there's no telling whether kind of front loading your parameters or not is going to be the best way to search for you. So I would play around with that just like you would in other research. And next slide, please. So here is, I thought just a really cool, just a very unique set of limiters. This is a collection about disasters. We can get very morbid in the web archiving world because we're always, studying disasters. This was an archive of various disasters. So if you're interested in any of these things, they've got diseases and natural disasters here you can limit. So if you're studying, for instance, the impact of Ebola on the world, You go, okay, I am going to check this out. Looks like there's 7,500 documents. This is going to be, they're probably going to have some good stuff in there for me. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of the advanced search from Archival. So if I want genealogy and I want the exact phrase New York, but I am not interested in Albany, that would be an example of kind of like a typical use of the advanced search. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a final quote from my favorite web archive researcher, Ian Milligan. So historians are expert users of archives. We're all researchers, probably. I mean, I think, broadly speaking, we can all consider ourselves a researcher in some way, shape, or form. But since not everything is Googleable, we are depending on archivists to help us create, select, and arrange historical content, to help us do our work, to help us find what we need to do, to write papers, to finish a genealogy report, whatever it is we're doing. Digital abundance, whether it's AI related or not, is something that is very concerning for all of us. And so we're depending on people who are doing the archive to help us kind of wade through that swamp. So yeah, I'm going to end there. Next slide. So this is the backlog YouTube page. The previous ones that I did are up here. Emma's been doing webinars, I think, almost as long as she's had a company, and there is quite a trove of just like anything even remotely related to archives. There's a lot of non-digital stuff and digital stuff as well. We were just talking about ordering archival supplies. Here's a webinar for you. So yeah, that's worth looking into as well. And then before we open it up for questions, I want to hand it back over to Emma.
Yeah. We'll do questions in just a second. I just want to talk about our upcoming webinars. Again, this is put on my company backlog. In a couple of weeks, we're going to do a webinar on encoded archival description. So some of us haven't touched EAD since graduate school. This is a really good primer on kind of also how it fits into like archives, like finding aids and how do you generate this, things like that. And then later on in April, we're going to do a webinar on decoding German scripts. So if you guys are familiar with the current script or fracture, there's all these kinds of German, like every German type, like the Gothic typeface or like the way like handwriting, those all have names. And if we can figure out which one it is, then it's easier to then translate it. So anyways, we do a lot of German genealogy. We're based in St. Louis, but we do genealogy for people across the nation. But if you're in the Midwest, it's very likely that you have some German ancestry. So we've just gotten a lot of requests for this. But does anybody have any questions for Sarah? Again, this webinar will be posted to our YouTube channel sometime later this week. The YouTube URL is backlog-archivist, and she did 2 others. So the first one was kind of a what are web archives, and the last one was it was a primer on how to do web archiving, so how to start collecting these websites. But we don't have a chat tonight, so if you have a question, please go ahead and unmute. And then alternatively, you can also shoot me an email. Sarah, I really liked instead of searching for like the websites, searching the metadata for genealogy. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, because if you're just doing, their search bar isn't super helpful unless it's the name of the website.
Yeah, totally. Back in the day, like you find out about the Wayback Machine, you get so excited and you're like looking up websites, but there's a lot more in the Internet Archive. It's really amazing.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. We'll go ahead and end it there if there are no questions. And again, if you shoot me an email, I can pass along any questions to Sarah. And then please join us for another one of our webinars coming up. Thanks, everybody.